Welcome, everybody, to day 3 of the 2024 SEC Football Media Days. I'm your host, Dave Shumate, joined by my fellow co-host, buddy, Cole Thompson. This segment is brought to you by, though, guys, before we get in depth of the Kalen DeBoer press conference reaction here, by our buddies who supplied this trip, sponsored this trip for our guy, Chris Phillips, who has boots on the ground. MyBookie, go to mybookie.ag and use code SECU at sign up to receive a special welcome offer on your first deposit, guys. I mean, you really got anything to bet on right now. Baseball is kind of in that slow period right now, but we have college football on the horizon. We encourage you to go use our buddies over at mybookie.ag. Cole, what's going on today, brother?
We are rolling, and it had to start off with the Roll Tide himself, Kalen DeBoer, taking on over for Nick Saban, first press conference in SEC Media Days. And let's just call a spade a spade. Guy knocked it out of the park. In everything that you're looking for in terms of persona that fits a program, that is what makes, I think, Alabama fans even more comfortable. They were already feeling very high and mighty about where they are after what we've seen the last few days on the recruiting trail. But now you get to hear from the man himself about the process that he's worked with for the last several months, taking in detail the emphasis on the 15 spring practices, not trying to emulate Saban, but still bringing up the certain similarities that resolve around him and Saban. I think that when you look at this from an Alabama standpoint, you have got to feel positive about the direction that the team is going in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, I think you would agree with Scott. I think when Greg Byrne hired him, it was the best hire you could make. I mean, it was at the time a realistic hire. I mean, Steve Sarkisian said he thought about it. I mean, but he said he thought about it. Kirby Smart ain't leaving Georgia. I mean, Kalen DeBoer is the next best thing. And to be fair to Kalen DeBoer, he's 2-0 against Steve Sarkisian the last 2 years, and he's 2-0 against Dan Lanning, two other guys' names that were mentioned in it. Again, I know all head-to-heads, there's context and everything. But still, I think Kalen DeBoer is as good of a hire as you could have had, and you could make an argument as the best. I would probably lean towards the best hire realistically that you could have went and had. The word jumps off, you tell me if I'm wrong here, Cole, when you hear him speak, and I've had the pleasure of meeting him one time when he was in his first year at Washington, just genuine.
Yeah.
That initially, salt to the earth kind of guy where it's like, dude, I actually feel like I'm talking to this guy and he's actually being real. Where you deal with some coaches like he's kind of putting a front on in the media, and I bet he's bad-mouthing somebody when he walks right off it. But you don't get that feel with Kalen DeBoer. Very genuine, appreciative, obviously very complimentary of Coach Saban. But some things he talked about, I mean, guys, I highly encourage you. Our guy Cole Thompson here had an interview. He talked highly about Jalen Milroe, who, like I mentioned, Cole Thompson here had an interview on the SEC Unfiltered channel with the Alabama quarterback, Jalen Milroe. Talked about his progression. Cole, anything you gathered from that, from hearing from DeBoer, anything changed? Factor in your conversation with Jalen, too, and how it mixes up.
Nah, I think that we got to go back to real fast. When Greg Byrne made the hire, the thing that I always said, looking at this from a 30,000-foot perspective, was don't get a former Saban assistant. Just don't do it. Don't even consider it. Don't look at Dan Lanning. Don't look at Steve Sarkisian. Never consider Lane Kiffin. And it's not because of those guys aren't doing their job at a high-end level. It's because when you have an outsider perspective that might see things a little different, what that does is it allows them to create their own enigma in Tuscaloosa. When you bring in a former Saban assistant, they're going to imagine that you do it a certain way, almost the Saban way, almost exactly like Saban for instantaneous results. So I thought that going out and getting a coach that not only comes off as genuine, but also I think embodies what it means to represent a university, regardless of what university it's at the highest level, from Sioux Falls, Tuscaloosa, he is going to be that guy. That was a smart move. For Jalen, what really I think has stood out throughout the entire process, from the time that I interviewed him, from the multiple times that I've met with him since, from the times that we've had conversations in the past, this is somebody that is not afraid of leadership. He's also not afraid of stepping up and kind of speaking out of turn. That way he is able to get the troops rallied behind him. This is somebody that you want to go to war with. And I think that you see that in DeBoer's comments, is the way that he carries himself in practice, the way that he carries himself in the locker room, the way that he presents himself to the rest of the huddle. This is somebody that's not going to sit by idly and act like he is just going to follow with the motion. He wants to be involved. And I think that for DeBoer going into year one, this is something that he is looking for. He wants that team leadership. There's a ton of veteran talent returning. The part that is so baffling is that Alabama lost a surplus of names in the portal, but they still have a majority of veteran talent coming back this upcoming fall that were all 5 stars and 4 stars and high-profile figures coming out of high school. And so that's going to carry the weight, but you need that leadership. That's where Jalen's really stepped up. He talked about the deep ball accuracy, how that has transpired, how that's continued to be a massive positive for this offense, especially for what DeBoer likes to run with this offense. But he's also talked about some of the mistakes that he's made and how he's worked on it, how he's finite the kinks, how he's been able to build off of the minor adjustments through spring football and what that's going to translate into the regular season. Milroe embodies what you need for any young coach, and especially for a first-year coach. And I think that DeBoer is going to lean on him a little bit more than we actually thought he was going to lean on Saban. Like, so far, we've heard about how Nick hasn't been in the building, but whenever a conversation's been going on, he's more than happy to answer. I think the way that we talk about him right now is the way we will be talking about Jalen during the regular season. He will be leaning on number 4 as his go-to guy.
Yeah, I think Roman Harper made a good point right when we were going live here on the SEC Network. In these transitions, because Roman Harper obviously played at Alabama, graduated in 2005, had 3 different head coaches during his time. So he always talked about just starting over in that transition. And the reason why they were so good in 2005, granted it was Shula's 30 years, that the older players had been through so much in that player-led team. Every good team I've ever been on is player-led. He made a good point. I think if Alabama, or he didn't exactly say this, but I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, and I agree. I think if Alabama's to hit the expectations that the program's expecting or the fans are accustomed to, it's going to have to be led by probably starting with the 3 guys that are there today: Tyler Booker, Malachi Moore, and Jalen Milroe. Guys like that. Throwing Jaden Roberts, who I think one of the better guards up there with Javante Spraggins from Tennessee, one of the better guards in the league. I think if you told me Alabama were to make the playoffs, make a deep playoff run, it would be because if it's a player-led team. And those guys getting over the hump. Because, again, you really don't know, I think in all aspects of life, in a relationship, in a job, in an organization, certainly in football, you don't really know what you're getting with somebody until you go through a full calendar year or something with them. So
sure,
for 6 months, yeah, you know, Kalen DeBoer, you haven't been through a season yet. Like we always just say in football, it's like, man, how is this coach? It's like, especially a new coach, is like, well, we've only gone through a spring, summer with him. Like, what is he like when the bullets are flying come fall? People's personalities change during stress and stuff like that. So I'll be interested to see how that transition is. And again, Caleb DeBoer, very genuine guy, seems very level-headed. I'm sure he'll be fine. But when there's going to be inevitable adversity, I think it's going to be that core group of guys, more so than even when Nick was there. And it's still for Nick's days from the player-led stuff. I think that was key, but I think even
what's so interesting, Dave, is that you hear people talk about the way that DeBoer acted when he came into Washington and his ability to get players to commit to him. I feel like that's what's going on right now in Tuscaloosa, is that it didn't take long for him to make that same impact. And just like he did when he was at Washington, results spoke volume almost immediately. And yeah, you brought in some other transfers, you brought in some names from the outside, players that you felt comfortable with. Well, he's kind of done that again. You know, when he went and added in Michael Penix, now he brings in Jeremy Bernard and Parker Brailsford. But he was also able to retain players that had entered the portal or thought about entering the portal that eventually came back. Rome Odunze was probably the biggest name that was mentioned when he was in Seattle. Well, you did that. It took a little bit longer of a stretch and a little bit longer of a walk to the watering hole, but Caden Proctor's back here, and he brought up how this is still a very veteran roster returning. We're returning most of our starters from last year, or our projected starters of what was the vision when initially I took the job. And I think that's a big deal, is that his ability to be able to get people to buy into his vision, but also show off that he is truly humble for who he is. He checked the ego at the door. You know, I heard someone else say this earlier, but he checked the ego at the door. He was not afraid of saying, look, there is a standard here in Tuscaloosa, and we know what the standard is. You know, I'm a graduate, you're a graduate, you worked at the university, you've seen the program firsthand. We understand that it does not matter who walks through that building in Bryant-Denny Stadium. It does not matter who is going to be the next leader or heir apparent of Nick Saban. Standard's not changing because the standard is set, and this is where a lot of programs, I think, don't understand that when you build this type of success, when you build this type of aura around your program, the next guy that follows is going to be brought up with that same expectation. And when you fail to meet that expectation, you can't use the excuse of, well, let's look at what's going on all in college football. Like, we can't use that, Dabo. We can't use that, Jimbo. We can't use that other programs. We got to remember that there is a certain standard set. And that's what DeBoer did, was he allowed the standard to stay the standard. And because of that humility, because of that ability to show his compassion for players, but also do what's best for the program, I think that that's why Alabama is in such a good spot right now. And it's why so many players have not only spoken positively about the direction of the program, but also probably the bigger thing, we are seeing a player-led program from the get-go. Like, it is already feeling like, yes, new coaching staff, veteranship, still the players that did decide to stick around are going to have such a big impact on the field. It's basically like having a second coach.
Cole, I think you make a good point about just checking your ego and not changing stuff. Like, if it's broke, don't fix it. Like Ray Perkins, who took over from Coach Bryant when he left when he retired in the 80s, in 82, went and took down Bear Bryant's tower, like started firing people that didn't need it. You start rubbing people the wrong way, and it's like, oh, dude, like, I get it. We need some changes, tweak that. I mean, everybody can get better, but why do that? I was always told when Bill Snyder retired initially at K-State, I forget what was the coach's name, Prince. What was his name? Ron Prince. It was there.
Ron Prince. Yeah.
For a brief minute, he started taking down pictures of Bill Snyder and stuff. It just, like you said, for him to go check his ego like that is very impressive. And some people are like, well, that's easy. But no, I mean, we all have egos, man. Like, everybody in the world has an ego to some extent. But I thought that was impressive. And I thought something else he mentioned in regards to recruiting. He said we've done a good job of getting kids on campus, and when they get on campus, they love our culture.
Well,
I think one thing that will be different this time is when kids would come to Alabama under Nick Saban from recruiting standpoint, some of those kids, especially in the summer in camp, it'd be a little intimidating. Like, it would be, recently it all started, the unofficial visit would turn into an official visit. They do the photo shoots. Granted, you can't do that anymore. But some kids would like to come and watch camp. When Saban was there, if you watch camp and you didn't compete, they held that against you. A story this after I was going, a story that I was told, a kid had actually ended up going to LSU, camp during the morning session. And one of the Louisiana connection guys there that works in the recruiting department, he's like, all right, coach, I'm about to go get food. He's like, dude, the second session starts in 30 minutes. Where are you going? He's like, dude, I ain't camping again. And he's like, well, dude, Coach Saban's going to expect that. He's like, shoot, dude, I ain't going to be able to make it here if he's expecting that. Kid ended up going to LSU. I mean, he was self-aware. He's like, I ain't going to fit here. I'm not going to say, I think it's going to be a little opposite. Like me and you talked about a little bit off air, Cole. I think in today's era, it has to be a little bit more player oriented.
Right.
Kids ask questions. He made a good statement today. I don't want to misquote him, but it was essentially like, I want to tell you why, not just what. Like, essentially, he's like, I think he's a good ear to lean on there from that perspective. I think that's going to be a little different. I think kids are going to come into that environment, and it's not going to be as like stoic and like, look, you're either with us or you're against us. It's going to be a little bit more laid back. Hey, we're going to take care of you. I mean, Coach Saban took care of his players, asking him.
Sure, of course he did.
It's going to be a little different. I think that's something that'll stand out. Cole, anything off the top of your head, anything else that you noted from his press conference?
Yeah, let's go through two more things real fast. I want to respond to how with the recruiting. The thing is that the genuineness is going to carry a lot of weight. And again, we know that the discount, the Saban tax was a big deal. You can't deny it. Anybody out there that's going to try and act like those Saban tax was not real, I don't know what you want me to say. It was. There were players that literally committed to Nick Saban. They did not commit to Tuscaloosa. They did not commit to Bryant-Denny Stadium. They did not commit to Denny Chimes. They did not commit to the Walk of Champions. They didn't care about going out to Innisfree. They didn't care about going out to Rounders. They wanted to play for Nick Saban, and the second that Saban walked out that door, they followed suit. But the genuineness of DeBoer, I think, is going to sell with a lot of players. NIL does a great job. And when you have a GM that knows how to build a program like Courtney Morgan, who we have got to start giving a little bit more credit to, like, people are saying, well, DeBoer's been doing a great job. Well, DeBoer's put the right pieces in play, and he brought that up on multiple occasions, having the right pieces and the right personnel in the scouting department for certain areas for me to look. That starts also with Courtney Morgan, who just helped build a national champion contender at Michigan. That's going to do a lot of damage for this squad moving forward. But what I really appreciate is that genuineness. You know, Alabama, He's not going to play second fiddle to anybody in the SEC in this new era simply because Saban's gone. You are bringing in Texas. You are bringing in Oklahoma. There are rules that are changing in the world of NIL that are going to benefit other programs. Missouri specifically with the state income tax and the way that they can go about things. All that aside, when you look at the direction that Alabama's going with just the simple humbleness, they're not going to play second fiddle, but there's going to be a certain aura to where if DeBoer sees something in you, he is going to give you a chance. And also, the part that made me so baffled is when people said, well, he's never coached before in the South. He's not going to know how to recruit in the South. Number one, Alabama still sells itself because of the script day and because of the history and the pageantry. Number two, he has only been on the West Coast as a power head coach. Do you know how much talent resides out on the West Coast? And now they have seen the results and the fruits of his labor be able to be established and that carry on down over to Tuscaloosa. Now, not only did you add in a great coach and a great mind in college football, but you added in a guy that has great relationships out west for players that wouldn't even consider going to Tuscaloosa before. But now DeBoer's there, they will. So I think that's a huge blessing in disguise along with Courtney Morgan and having the right pieces in play. The other part that I thought was really important, he's not going to be Nick Saban. He's not going to be Nick Saban. But that doesn't mean that there aren't similar traits in Nick Saban that emulate in DeBoer. And I thought the biggest thing was that, and I have immense amount of respect for Kirk Bohls. I've worked with him in the past. He is phenomenal at what he does. Congratulations if he ever watches this on his new job at the Houston Chronicle. But he asked him, what's it like to be a sicko to take over for a guy like Nick Saban? Did you ever have any questions about potentially replacing a legend like this? I'm going to be completely transparent. You have to be a sicko to want this job. Because if you're not sick enough to think that you can emulate similar results while still respecting the legacy of what Nick Saban was, you're not meant to be in Tuscaloosa. I want somebody who is going to take the bull by the horns, understand the expectations, understand the role that you are replacing, and on top of all of that, act like that you are going to be able to only continue that legacy and build it to new heights. And I thought that his answer to that question about the humbleness, but also the attentiveness of what is Alabama, and that I am going headfirst into the exact level of competition. To me, it's right up there with Brett Venables saying we're head on into the SEC for best quotes of the weekend. Because if he understands it's Alabama, expectations aren't changing. I knew that going in. I already had my belt as tight as humanly possible when I walked in the door.
No, you're right. I'm going to give Southern Red here a shout out. She's mentioned a couple of times. I know you mentioned it, Cole here. Courtney Morgan does a good job. Met him a couple of times. Real low-key guy. He's a big communicator, more than I think he is the evaluator from everything I can kind of explain him and Aaron Hodges. They've done a good job. Coach DeBoer mentioned it. Getting kids on campus. I think when they like to get there, they like the culture. I think you made a good point on that. And also DeBoer comes off as he doesn't have all the answers, and I think he admits that. Like, I don't have all the answers to that. I can't communicate with kids in today's time like y'all can't. Just get them on campus. We'll get our arms around them, get them in our meeting rooms that want to be here. A lot of coaches, you've been around them too, Cole, they think they have all the answers.
Yeah.
No one has all the answers. Nick Saban doesn't have all the answers. The best ones rely on people they trust, even at times when they may tell them an answer they don't want to hear. And I think that's an ultimate confinement. And I think Kalen DeBoer leaves that window to be open, which I think is going to be very beneficial for him in his first few years in Tuscaloosa. Cole, last question before we get out of here. What do you think, in your opinion, what is a realistic, expectation, accomplishment you think that would be fair for this 2024 Alabama squad? Like, is it a playoff appearance? Is it 9-3? Like, what do you think is a fair assessment of this squad expectation heading into this year?
Expectations aren't changing in Tuscaloosa. So the way that I would describe Kalen DeBoer right now, and this is just where my journalism brain goes, he is the ideal editor. He is going to fix the minor tweaks that were found going into the offseason and then send out a product that you are fine with being published anywhere. And being published means being put on the field on game days that is going to continue that same success. And I think that's a big deal. And that's a huge blessing in disguise for the Crimson Tide. More importantly, that's something that I think is going to only continue to transpire. It's challenging to say that Alabama will be the same version of Alabama because there is a transition period. Whether or not Saban and DeBoer both emulate the same type of mentality of player first, We want to put the players in the best position. We want to have our roster all acting on the same level. We want there to be a cohesive balance. It's a new era. It is. It's a new process. It's a new formation. It's a new personnel package on both sides of the football. And even though he has some players that he's brought out over from Washington, it may take a little bit. But I do think that this roster is still one of the 12 best in college football. And because it has the Alabama name next to it, and then naturally that's going to carry a lot of weight when it comes to voters, they are going to be a playoff team if they get to 10-2. And I think that needs to be the expectation this year. Maybe you don't win the national championship. Maybe you do. But DeBoer doesn't lose. DeBoer doesn't take the backseat to anybody, and he hasn't. And that's why I think it's a big deal that he is in Tuscaloosa, because if there's a stigma right now that Texas is coming on in, and they're going to be now the crown jewel. You throw in Georgia, they're about ready to take place as set front and center stage with Kirby Smart. Well, you got to get somebody that has shown you it doesn't matter who I replace, what situation I'm in. I'm going to make the best out of this process, and that's where Alabama is. I think a playoff team. And I will say this. If this happens, and there are people in the chat that are watching, I will get an NIL discount for this one. The DeBoer discount is going to be trending on Twitter when he starts to win number one classes. There will be a DeBoer discount just like there was a Saban tax.
I would agree with you. From buddies and stuff that I graduated with, I think it's a fair expectation. A realistic / fair expectation is a playoff appearance, whether that's 10-2. Anything after that, I think first year, there's adjustments, growing pains. I think would be icing on the cake. Anything after that. I think a playoff appearance, to me, obviously it's national championship or bust, trying to get to number 19. But I think a playoff, you mentioned it, I think that's a 10-2, most likely, playoff appearance. I think that's a successful year one. But for myself here, guys, in reacting to Kalen DeBoer's first time at SEC Media Days, I'm your host, Dave Shumate, co-host here, Cole Thompson. Guys, we'll be here all day. We got 3 more. We got our guy Jeff Levy coming up on deck here in probably about, I think, 20, 30 minutes, and we'll be reacting to that after. We also have Billy Napier, and we'll have Steve Sarkisian as well to wrap up day 3. But, guys, come join, react. Hit us up in the chat room. We'll get you. We'd love to chat. I see 282 people in here now. Appreciate you joining us. Before we get out of here, go follow us on all social media platforms. Our guy Chris Phillips has boots on the ground at the Omni in Dallas. So give us a follow for all our contributors here at the SEC Unfiltered channel, guys. But we'll be back here probably in about an hour breaking down another first-timer at SEC Media Days, Jeff Levy. But, guys, I appreciate you joining us. Have a great morning.